Hey everybody, OperationZ here, and we are starting in Joseph's story today. And basically, we'll be going over everything that happens with Joseph and his story, what happens with everything that he goes through and how he just perseveres through it. And then God ends up blessing him with a great blessing at the end, and all these things that take place and just happen for Joseph because he didn't lose hope and he didn't give up and he put his faith and his trust in his God. And, we have these things here, and, we have that blessedness that we can come in and just see this story here of everything that takes place in Joseph's story and his life, and a lot to learn from this Old Testament story. And we're just gonna dive in here, and basically Joseph is the son of Jacob and the son of Rachel, and he's got a bunch of older brothers, one younger brother that's his full brother named Benjamin, and then we have all the other brethren, the sons of Leah and the sons of his other wives that he had. And, Joseph is deeply favored by Jacob. Like, Jacob deeply favors Joseph, and he just really loves his son. And that's because he's Rachel's son and he loves Rachel. And, he loves Rachel more than his other wives. And, when it was just as Leah and Rachel, God saw that, and he actually opened the womb of Leah so that she bared many children, and Rachel's womb was left closed. But then she ended up having more children, or she ended up having Joseph, and then she also had Benjamin as well. And that it actually, took, like, when that happened, it took her life. And basically these things happen, but she ended up having Joseph, and Joseph is just deeply loved by Jacob, as well as with, God. um, we see that God blesses Joseph in the storyline, and he goes through all these things. But the later end of it, after he goes through all these trials that he suffers through, there ends up being big blessings after that, when he gets free from all the trials that he undergoes, and what he is just basically having to go through and undergo. And we're going to start here, Genesis chapter 37:1. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. So he's right there in the land of Canaan, and all of his family is with him, all his sons, and as well as all his all his possessions are there too, and his cattle and all these things, and they tend to the cattle. And Joseph does certain tasks, and we're going to see one of the tasks that he does. Jacob really trusts Joseph, so whenever his older brothers do stuff they're not supposed to do, or this thing or that thing, Joseph would report to his father. So basically, because of that, and because they all know that Joseph is loved more than them, there's a lot of jealousy and strife. So they're all basically pretty angry at Joseph. There's just tension there, and we're going to see that as the story unfolds. So let's read here in 2. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, the father's wives, and Joseph brought onto his father their evil report. So, basically we see here that pretty much if they were doing things that they weren't supposed to do, or if they weren't doing things right, Joseph would report in on them and he would tell his father what they were doing, concerning the flock and concerning all these things. And, we're going to read further here. Verse 3, Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many collars. So basically, again, it's being shown that Joseph is loved over all the other sons that he has. Jacob loves Joseph over all of them, and Benjamin too, because because Benjamin is also the son of Rachel. And but Benjamin's a little younger and Joseph's older, and he has Joseph doing more stuff for the family, and that's one of the things that he would do. He would get, just pretty much get their report, and he would get, like do whatever else that his father had for him to do, and that was just part of what he was supposed to do, and it wasn't just their evil report when they did bad, but he would also let them know when they're doing good and when they're prospering and just when they're doing what they're supposed to do, and just, tending to his flocks and his herds out there in the wilderness. And basically, we just see that there's a lot to take in with that. And the coat of many collars, it's just another example of how much more well favored and well loved above all of his brethren he is, because upon Joseph, he gets this big flashy coat that he wears, and all the brethren see it, and naturally that's just going to make them more jealous, cause more strife and all these things, because now he's got, like, where he sees, like, basically he carries that prestige of this coat, and he's got that. And they just have their normal clothes, and then it just stirs up jealousy, even though Joseph is equal with his brethren. And Reuben is basically his eldest son, but we see that he still favors Joseph more, and the eldest son is supposed to get the birthright and all these things, and we see that later on they all get their own special unique blessing for where they're going to be at as part of Israel. They get their own special unique blessing, and it just talks about everything that they're going to have and all that stuff. But here Joseph is more well favored and more loved by their father than all the rest of them, and really it's not even just per se well favored, but it's biased. Basically, he loves Joseph more than all them, and if they'd have seen that he loved them all equally and stuff like that, then there probably wouldn't have been all that tension and jealousy towards Joseph. But we just see that in his story that all this is there. So there's already that tension, and you can just tell as the story goes on. But what ends up happening here shortly is pretty much, it's to basically rile everybody up a little more. Like, all his brethren are more riled up because pretty much Joseph, he, we'll get into it, but we are in Genesis chapter 37, verse 4. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. So we see here in the story that, they see this coat that their father gave to Joseph, and now they're all more exceedingly jealous of Joseph. And it's right here that they hated him and they couldn't speak peaceably unto him. And there's just tension and strife. And then we get into here, Genesis chapter 37, verse 5. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. So we'll get into why they hated him all the more with his dreams. But pretty much these dreams that he had, which are actually prophetical, because everything that's set in motion was all part of God's plan, and it comes true for Joseph, all these things that take place and all these things that happen. But see, in the moment, instead of him having discretion and keeping his prophetical dream to himself, he goes and he tells all his brethren his dream. And when that happens, it says they hated him all the more, pretty much. Yeah, they hated him yet the more. And, he had prophetical dreams of the future. Joseph, also being known as the King of Dreams, is just one title that he has, as well as Zaphnath-Paneah, which basically means the Savior, because of something that happens later on that we're not going to talk about right here, but just something that happens with his storyline. And that's just the name that Pharaoh gives him, which, it means the Savior, because he had good that pretty much saved the whole East from total devastation and death and all these things, and a lot of stuff that just ends up happening. He gets that title, but we're not going to look too far ahead yet. And verse 6 here, Genesis chapter 37, verse 6. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. So, again, like as believers too, and just in this case right here with his brethren, there's a lesson to be learned from it, that, we should see each other, everybody is equal to you. You shouldn't see anybody as lesser than you in any kind of way, because that's arrogance and that's pride and all these things, right? So one thing Paul says, and this is later on in the New Testament, but he actually said, look at other people as if they're better than you. And when you kind of have that mindset that you don't think you're better than everybody, it keeps you from making those, just really arrogant things, exalting yourself and all these things really high, and as well as, not getting really boastful. Or if somebody says something, instead of handling it the proud way, you humble yourself and, just kind of do it, go about it a different way. So you just kind of have that demeanor, like, and everybody's equal, of course. Nobody's better than anybody. Nobody's really worse, per se, when it comes to matters like this here. But, just having that notice of equality. And again, even just seeing others as better than yourself, because it keeps you, at a kind of, keeps you kind of balanced in a way that you don't be oversensitive if somebody says something, or you don't boast, or you don't be extremely arrogant, and it's easy to do. And again, we all fall short. Sometimes we'll boast about something, not realizing it, and then, there'll be something that comes along to kind of humble us, and then we realize basically, hey, I was proud and so forth, and then, basically it just goes like that. But pretty much you have to, have that mentality, just, of equality and all that. But these dreams that Joseph is about to reveal to his brethren, if they didn't hate him before, they're going to hate him all the more now, because, now he's basically saying he's in a way exalted position above all of them, which comes true, and everything's set into motion. He gets this elevated position. He gets all this stuff that takes place. But, again, he goes through a lot of things, and a lot of trials and a lot of struggles. And, we see just all these things take place for Joseph here, in the later end of all the good that abounds in his later end of his story. We can't really, I don't really want to talk about it right here, because this is the beginning of the story. But basically, it just, we see that. And again, if he hadn't, things were tense, but they wouldn't have got this bad if he wouldn't have, basically revealed these dreams to him, which are very, exalted dreams, and he dreamt them, and he knew that there was meaning to them, because Joseph didn't just dream dreams, but he also had the ability to interpret his dreams and what they mean. He had that too, and he had these, that was just a gift that he had. In particular, was he had prophetical dreams, and there's just a lot to take in with that. But, we'll get more into that as the story progresses. And that's the story for right now, and you all have a blessed day.